Hello, 8th graders. Sorry this took a little bit of a while. This is our New Deal video. What was the New Deal and how did it affect the United States during the Great Depression? A little bit of backstory about this. I was going to make this earlier in the week. However, life got in the way with a lot of different things that I have to do around my house. So, that being said, let's get right into it. What was the New Deal? Well, we talked about New Deal Coalition on Monday or Tuesday, something like that, and that coalition brought Franklin Delano Roosevelt into the White House. Now, let's talk a little bit about what was called the 100 Days. Okay? 100 days is referred to the first 100 days of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's presidency. And so from there on out, it's always been a very crucial time for a new president when they come into office. It's seen as the time where they have the most political capital, meaning that they can do a lot of things because, number one, they're not running for re-election yet, so they don't have to worry about that. Number two, they kind of have something called a mandate. And what a mandate is that, especially when a president is sworn into office after a big victory, it shows that the people want this person. The people want this person because they like the ideas that this person has, okay? So that was true for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. When he was sworn in 1933, after his big victory over Herbert Hoover, he kind of had a mandate from the people saying that we want you to get us out of this. Now, here's a really important thing that I'm going to keep referring to throughout this video. The New Deal did not end the Great Depression. Okay? The New Deal did not end the Great Depression. However, it goes down as in history because it's really important in understanding just how much it changed America. Okay? And this will go through this video. We'll talk just a little bit about this. So let's start about what the New Deal was. Franklin Roosevelt, throughout his campaign for president, had said he wants to make a new deal with America. This was hearkening back to his fifth cousin, Teddy Roosevelt, my boy, who said he wanted to make a square deal with America. And what the New Deal was a series of executive orders and legislation. Okay, really exciting, right? But these legislations were into three different categories. Number one was relief programs. These were most common different types of money programs that were going to provide relief for all the unemployed. Okay. Number two were the recovery programs. These were different sorts of programs that were trying to basically like kickstart the economy back into production. Okay. The last one was the reform programs. Okay. The reform programs were the ones that you really have to kind of see as the long-lasting ones. These are the ones that were going to try to make sure that the Great Depression would never happen again. Okay. So let's start with the reform ones. A lot of the programs were dealt especially with the banks. So here's how banks used to work in the 1920s and 30s. They were all local banks. Okay, they were not big corporate banks. They were small, independently owned banks. And so people would put their money in, and that was the town bank. And so what would happen is that during the Great Depression, these banks collapsed because they didn't have enough capital to repay loans. And once people started doing what was called bank runs, which was running into and trying to take all your money out of the bank before it closed down, it did not end well. And a lot of the banks could not sustain this. Okay? And so Roosevelt actually issued what was called a bank holiday. And so he closed all of the banks in most of the United States. Could you imagine if the president tried to do this today? People would go nuts. But he did. And the point of it was that he closed it. And so basically the government only let those banks reopen that could sustain themselves. And so this closed a lot of banks, but it also kind of calmed everything down in terms of people running out and grabbing their money. Let's talk a little bit about some recovery programs. One of the biggest recovery programs was the AAA, okay? Agricultural Adjustment Agency. Also, the NRA. Now, this is not like you hear the NRA in the news today. That's the National Rifle Association, which is a gun owners club. The NRA back then was the National Recovery Agency. And so these agencies would go around and they would basically give jobs. Give jobs to people. One of the biggest groups of unemployed people were young people at this time. And so what they did was they gave jobs for them to build roads and to build highways and to build different things that the country needed. You see this done a lot, especially like in 2008, 2009, when we were going through the Great Recession. The government would hire a bunch of people to build highways and improve highways. So this provided a lot of new jobs for people to basically get themselves kind of back up to where it was. One thing that's kind of important to note about the New Deal is that when you look at the primary sources, you look at what Roosevelt was talking about, is that sometimes the New Deal is referred to as socialism. And in a sense, it is. Socialism is where the government has more control over the economy, and that's what happened during the New Deal. However, it's not as socialist as you would think, because what Roosevelt didn't want was he didn't want the American people to be completely reliant on the economy, or excuse me, on the government. He wanted Americans to be self-sufficient during this time period. And so as he's going through this, he basically says these are all things to kind of jumpstart the economy back into it. How'd it go? Not well. Not well, actually, because actually the United States went into recession after the New Deal. This is just going back to another example of nobody really understands how the economy works, unfortunately. You can try as hard as you can. You can pump a bunch of money into the economy, but it can still not work out the way you think. It's all kind of guesswork. The New Deal's probably biggest lasting impact was Social Security. Now, what is Social Security? Why, when you guys get jobs in the next couple years, you're going to lose some money from your paycheck and the government's going to take some of it? Well, Social Security is a nest egg. It is relief primarily to retirees. And these are people who do not have jobs anymore and rely on government paychecks such as Social Security. That's not the only group that gets Social Security in modern day, but I want to focus on the elderly first. During the Great Depression, one of the biggest groups of people living in poverty were the elderly. And so Social Security was seen as a way to kind of relieve those people who really, they can't go out and get new jobs. They can't go out and work on a country road. So Social Security was one of the most lasting impacts of the New Deal. Another thing that's happening at this time that really didn't help the Roosevelt administration was the Dust Bowl. And what the Dust Bowl was, it was this massive drought that happens in Oklahoma, northern Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, Iowa, basically all the places where we grow all our food. And there's a gigantic drought. And it's so bad that the topsoil basically dies and creates these huge dust storms. And you can go on your online textbook and look at different images of the Dust Bowl, and you see just how much dust was going into people's houses. And so this was hugely devastating to the economy, because that was the breadbasket of the United States and indeed of the world. So keep going on with the New Deal. What made the New Deal so important? Well, the New Deal basically dramatically increases the size of the federal government, the national government. And this is what has made the New Deal, either you are super supportive of the New Deal when you study it, or you are super against the New Deal. And it all depends on your political ideology, okay? So I'm going to try and make this a little less controversial talking about this, because your parents might have a certain opinion, okay? If you are in favor of the government helping those who can't help themselves, who need support, then you're probably more likely to see the New Deal as an important first step. If you believe that the government doesn't have any business supporting people, and that that the free market is the tool to get people out of poverty, then you probably see the New Deal as interference by the government. It really just kind of depends. And the important thing that we as social scientists today need to look at is that we can't look at the New Deal completely through a political ideology. Okay, we have to also look at it as a historical impact. Okay, because it's at one point it's a historical event, and it's also a political event. The political side is murky because it's all based on your opinion. The historical side is actually a lot easier to break down, and that's what I'm doing here today. The historical side is easy to break down because the question is, did the New Deal impact the United States? And the answer is unequivocally yes. There are times where people will say we need to decrease the size of the federal government. What they're referring to is all the money the federal government spends. The federal government spends trillions and trillions of dollars in modern day. This would not be happening without the New Deal. And one of those things that's important to note is that when people are talking about decreasing the federal government, they're not saying get rid of things like Social Security, usually, because those are extremely popular things for people. And also the people who vote the most are the elderly. And what do they get? They get Social Security. So when you're talking about the New Deal, I want you guys to just kind of keep in mind, it was relief, recovery, and reform. Okay, relief, recovery, reform. These were programs, these were legislation that were designed to try and jumpstart the American economy. Now, we'll take another video that I'll post as a part 2 when I have a little bit more time this weekend to post it, okay? But for you guys, I've already sent you out a video that's talking about what we are going to be doing over spring break. There's no assignments, but if you are wanting to be interacting with me through history, keep posting questions. I'll keep doing questions and answers as much as I can. But also, put topics that you want me to make videos on the Google Classroom, or have your parents post them for you on if they are following me on Facebook, okay? I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys have in store, and I hope you guys have a great first day of spring. Ta-ta.